Hello everyone, welcome to the introduction to Maya 2015. We're going to go over the user interface today and kind of make this, help you guys get a little bit more acquainted with the program and be able to have a little bit better of a handle on how to make your way around and start doing some modeling. So, we're going to first kind of address this little cube in the middle here. To navigate around this cube in this viewport workspace area, you're going to have your mouse set up to where it's a 3-button system. Make sure that left and right is obviously left and right, and that the third button is assigned to your mouse wheel. If it's not, go to Preferences and you can assign it there. If you have trouble finding the preferences, you can always do it in your control panel on your computer. Okay, so once your third button is assigned, if you hold down Alt and left drag around the outside of your box, it'll let you rotate around it. If you wheel in and out, it'll do the zoom in and out. And if you hold down Alt and push in your mouse wheel, it'll let you drag the scene around to wherever you want. If you hold down the right mouse button, it'll give you a bunch of different options. Right now nothing is selected, so nothing's coming up, but it can be a shortcut. So if you left-click an object, it'll select it. You'll be able to tell it's being selected because it'll start glowing green like you see here. If you hold down the right button on this object, you'll see also we have a bunch of options here. These options I will go over a little bit later on once we get past some of the user interface and some of the controls, and we'll kind of dive into some of that. There are more specific components to this particular object, this cube here. But I'll come back to it, I promise. Okay, so I'm going to kind of start really quick on the left side here, this column with these arrows. The first one is your selection tools. The first one, it looks like your mouse pointer. Lets you, you don't really necessarily have to have it selected, but you select it and it'll let you select objects inside your scene. They have one, it's a lasso tool. It's kind of like Photoshop, so you can select that way, or you can shift select and select multiple objects. The next one is a paint selection tool. The lasso tool and the paint selection tool I don't really find to be that useful, but they're there if you're comfortable with using them from Photoshop. Moving down the line here, we have this cone or with an arrow underneath it. That is your translate tool. If you click that, it'll let you move your cube up, down, and backwards and or forward and back in Z space. Blue is your Z axis. If you look over this little gizmo that's popped up on my cube. Red is for your x-axis and green is for your y-axis. The yellow box in the middle is your world axis, so it'll move in all directions at the same time. If you grab that, it's not constrained to any axis, it'll move everywhere. Sometimes that's what you want, sometimes it's not. If you want just to go up, just select the y by itself, or I'm sorry, the color green, but that is your y-axis. And it'll turn yellow once it's been selected. That'll work for all of them. So you'll know that your axis that you want it selected is selected by the change to yellow. Once you have control of that, just hold down on the arrow. The other axis points will disappear on there, and you'll just go up and down the Y with no movement in the X or the Z. Okay. Moving down here, we got rotation. It's got this little curved arrow going around a ball. If you select that, same kind of deal as the translate. The colors are the same. So blue is for Z, red is for X, and Y is green. And as you expected, this yellow, it's been selected around the outside, but if I was to select this, it'll turn blue. The blue this blue axis one here is the world rotation, which for rotate, I really don't suggest. There's really no reason to have a world rotation. It kind of spins in all axes and it's really unpredictable. But sometimes you may find a use for it. But you can lock down specific axes like the X or the Z, and it'll rotate just in that one axis all by itself. Okay. Last tool I'm going to explain over here is the scale tool. You have your X and your Z and your Y, all the same color coding. The blue in the middle is the universal scale. scales all directions at the same time. This is actually the one I think I use the most, because I'll create an object and it'll be too big to fit in one spot, so I'll just shrink or make it bigger to get to the size I want. So it's essentially the same object, just in a different size. So you just grab that one and it'll shrink all axes at the same time. Sometimes you want to use these other ones, just make it a little bit longer or a little bit taller. It's great for doing modeling. Use scale quite a bit. I'm going to move back to the normal or the original size of this, and you can do that by undoing your previous movements. You can do that by Control Z, or sometimes just Z, depending on if you're on a Mac or not. Also, just to keep in mind that the way that I'm allowed to or able to back up is through history. History is recorded in Maya. It depends on what your setting is. It could be up to 30 movements. It could be, or 30 commands. It could be longer or shorter depending on what you put in your preferences. When you're done with an object altogether, you want to tend to delete the history on it, because otherwise will start using up a bunch of your memory in Maya. But if it's just a couple things, it's not necessarily important to delete the history, just because that also deletes the possibility of doing an undo. Alright, so before I go any further down this line here, I want to quickly talk about the right side over here. You may have noticed that when I was messing with the translate and the rotate on these, you see like this channel box over here on the right side of the screen. You'll notice that like some of the values in Z have changed. That's now at 39.95 degrees. You can set values in these, and it will react to whatever you put in there. Putting values of 50 and 50 in Y lets you kind of be more specific about the rotation you're after. It's very helpful for animations, because sometimes you want to have something rotate after a certain number of frames at a certain degree, and you can be very precise that way. Also, you'll notice they have a few other things, or tabs, I'm sorry, above, a little further on the right of the channel box on the side of the screen. It's the one that says channel box, and right above it says attribute editor. These we're not going to get too heavy into, but each one has, like, this is the cube shape, so you can kind of manually adjust some of these in here. You have your shading group, that every object has a shading group usually attached to it. You could make some minor adjustments there. These are all just tools that are at your disposal. When we get to a point in a project where it's necessary for us to dive a little deeper into there, I'll go a little bit more into unveiling what some of these particular attributes can be used for. But right now, since we don't have anything but a cube on our screen, it will just have no context. We'll just save it for when we actually get there. Okay, so going down a little further, we got this big box with a grid, or a little looking kind of grid on its side. This is your panel layout area. The big one is the 3D world, which we're currently in right now, and the 4-panel layout on the right below it. We're going to click on that, and what we have here is top, side, and front views, and then the 3D view in the corner here. Sometimes it's good just to work in a side view or a front view or a top view without your 3D view available to you here. There's lots of instances in modeling when you're modeling up to an image in the background, and you're trying to make it kind of in the same shape as that image, so it's good to have an orthoscopic view like this. And if you want to be just working, let's say this is, we're going to set this one to front, and you want this to take up the full screen, just make sure your mouse is inside that window, and then press the spacebar, and Maya will make that the full screen. And if you want to go back, you can just press spacebar again, and it'll go back to your 4-panel. And if you want to just go back to your 3D view, you can just click on with the mouse in there. And if you notice, like this, when you hold down the spacebar, this all these options that pop up to you. Some people call this the God key. It's a shortcut to a bunch of different things inside of Maya. It helps speed up your workflow. If you're very used to it, you can customize this a little bit. I don't ever actually use this. I like setting up a shelf and I just work off of that. But some people who work very fast and do the same thing repetitively might want to kind of get a feel for this and use this when necessary. So again, that's just holding down the space bar, and that little menu will pop up, and it has all kinds of different tools and features inside of Maya. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. Just tap the space bar. Don't hold it down. Now we're back in our 3D view. We'll go down a little further here. This next, right below the 4 panel, has what looks like the same thing as the top box up here, the little grid viewport, and then on the side it has what looks like a few little lines. So this opens up, and this little area here is called our outliner. If you happen to not have this feature inside your Maya, sometimes the display doesn't have the same features for every particular version of Maya. You can find it inside of Windows, general editors. Where is it at? Outliner. There it is. So the outliner is inside your Windows. If you can't find it, you just click that and it'll come up. But we have it. I like it being right there. That works for me. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because organization inside of Maya is beyond key. Your scenes can get really large the more objects you have, and it might start out nice and cute with just one object and not having to worry about naming it or anything like that, because it's just one object. But when you end up with buildings and lights and cameras and dynamics and all kinds of rigging things going on, naming convention becomes a huge thing. So when it comes to base meshes, every company you work for will have its own naming convention usually. But just out the gate for learning, we're going to call anything that's made out of a base mesh geometry mesh, and then what you want it to be. If you press space, Maya will always add an underscore for it because everything has to be one word for Maya. So we're going to call it mesh, and we're going to call it box. Okay, so see, Maya just added an underscore there for me. Anytime we have a new object we'll add to the scene, we'll say it's mesh, whatever it's going to be. And that will help us out with our naming convention. Okay, so moving down the line here, this next one here is called our graph editor. Graph editors are great for animation. We don't have any animation going on currently, but we can go ahead and add some very easily. There's several ways to do it. One of them is by accessing the animation menu. But since I don't really want to get too far into the animation sides yet, I'm going to tell you guys the shortcut. It's a little bit of a quick and dirty way of doing animations. So first, before I tell you the shortcut, I'm going to explain the timeline at the bottom here. This timeline is what you would expect it to be. It is a running timeline for the film that you are currently doing. Yes, we are doing a film real quickly here. This is also called a scrub bar. So it says 1 here, it says 120 on the other side here. You can edit how long your film clip is going to be by just inserting a different value. We can say this is going to be 50 frames instead of 120. No problem. It just redoes it for us. Okay, so to do some animations, we have to have an object that is going to be animated. So we have our cube, and let's say we're going to animate it. And the way we're going to do that is by hitting S when it's selected. You'll notice all the channel box over here turn red. And you might at first be like, oh no, it's all red, but actually that is just Maya saying that those attributes are all keyframed. And they're all keyframed to 0, 0, 0 and the scale at 1.06 on frame 1. Now, we're going to move the time slider to 50 by clicking 50 with our left click, and you'll see it highlight 50 over here. Now, if you have this key down here clicked in the bottom right, it will record any changes or movement in these values on frame 50. Now, if it isn't checked, you can move it over there and nothing will happen. It won't record anything. So, for instance, I'm going to turn off the key. And like most animators will tell you to do this, don't have the key active unless you know exactly what you're doing, because you can mess up a lot of things on accident. But if you know what you're doing, it helps speed up your workflow. So we'll say I moved it to there. But you'll notice there's no red line down here like there is on frame 1. That means that I didn't actually record anything. So Control Z, I'm going to move that back to center. Now I'm going to activate this here, the key at the bottom right. And now I'm going to translate forward in Z, and I'm going to also rotate it just for the fun of it. We'll rotate it 161 degrees. That sounds great. Okay, and you'll see there's a red line here now because it recorded that animation information. Now, you go back to 1. We're also going to kind of acknowledge a couple things before I show you the animation. That we have 2 lines here. We have the blue one and the green one. That is the graph editor recording the animation from the Z movement and the Y rotation. So I'm going to show you the animation. You'll see that, let's deselect that real quick just so you can see the cube do its thing. We'll scrub through here. You can go 1 to 50. You can see it spinning as it's going, and done. You can also click back on the far right and then press play again. And there we go. And it loops. Okay, let's scoot back. Now we're going to go back to the graph editor real quick. So let's say that I decided I didn't like the rotation on this. I want to edit the rotation on a little bit. So I can select the key for just the Y rotate. Now I'm going to change it to a little further out here and a little bit up. Actually, we'll make it go a little bit down. So there we go. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so it rotates a lot slower. Let's say that I want to translate a lot faster too. So I can just move it like that. And I want to go up like that. And let's see how that looks. Actually, frames. So we're going to go back. So there you go. It moves a lot faster, a lot further. So that's just a little bit of the power of the graph editor. There's a lot of fine tuning you can do. As you notice that these lines here, these are all exponential growths. You can change that to where you have linear things going on. So you can just grab one side of the handle, and this little straight line will make it to where you have linear growth. And if you want to keep one side exponential and have it linear from there, they call that ease in, ease out. But if you want to make it to where there's no ease in, ease out, it's just straight into and very sudden end. You can fix that. Make sure the animation just goes straight same speed the whole time. There's uses for those. That's the reason why the tools are here. We'll get in later animations. We'll kind of dive into the graph editor again and kind of go over it a little bit more in depth. But I just kind of want to give you guys a quick overview of it. Okay, so we're going to move on from there. We're going to go down to the Hypershade. And it's the one box right below the graph editor on the left near the bottom. Okay, so when you create an object, Maya has all objects first attached to this Lambert 1. You don't ever want to have all your objects attached to the same shader because then they're all going to look the same. So every time you have a new object, you want to create a new Lambert for it, unless it's the same object and you have a bunch of them. Then you like create Lambert 2, have it look a particular way, and assign it to all those objects. Also, we're going to do naming convention with our shaders just so we don't get lost with the 50 different shaders. You'd be surprised how easy that happens. Okay, so we're going to call it box underscore Lambert. Okay. Now, there's two ways you can assign this. We can take our Lambert here and we can drag and drop it onto here, or we can select this box and right click the shader and assign a material to selection. So we'll do it this way since I already have it selected. And obviously you can't really see any kind of change because the shader is still gray. So we'll change the box Lambert shader. Now, the shaders have attributes just the same way the box does. So we're going to look over on the far right side, and we'll go to the Attribute Editor tab, and under Color, we'll left click that, and we'll change it to, let's turn it orange. Okay, it's being a little stubborn. Do it there. There we go. Now it's perfect. So there. We'll say that's a good color. And you can see it in the viewport that our box is now orange because we changed the shader color to orange. Okay. So that kind of wraps up the left side. I'm going to quickly kind of go over some of the attributes that are inside of polygons. So if we select our object here, kind of going back to where we started, if you look over, I'm sorry, if you right-click the object, it'll pull up the edge, vertex, and face. Those are the types of components that go into the polygons. So if we select edge, you can model just the edge. You can rotate that particular edge if you want to, or you can translate it. If you press W, you can. That's a hotkey for translate. E is the hotkey for rotate. R is the hotkey for scale. So if you want to scale that corner in, and W to translate it up, that'll help you kind of start getting your box model in a particular way you want it to be. If you want to just access the face all by itself, the faces of the polygons can be modeled just the same way as the edges. Translate those out. If you want to rotate just a face, you can totally rotate just a face. If you want to scale the face, you can scale just the face. Translate it again. That's pretty much like the core of how you start modeling things. You can delete a face if you wanted to. I mean, that's an option. Bring that back. And the last thing is vertexes. Vertexes are all the corners of the polygons. And you'll know they're selected, like I said, by when you select it with your left click, it'll turn yellow. You cannot rotate, you cannot scale vertexes unless you have more than one. But you can translate just individual ones. It's called point polling. But if you have two, you can scale those or rotate those. Really, what I kind of find scaling vertexes is great for sometimes when you end up with vertexes that you want to stay parallel but somehow end up coming off axis. So you saw me shift drag, make a little selection box and select those. So all four of these are selected. If you hold down, if you press R, that'll bring your scale tool up. And if you push the y-axis down to the blue box, that'll make it to where it'll make the vertexes all horizontal. So sometimes you want to do that, vertically or horizontally. It's a nice tool to kind of straighten things out if things start coming off axis. Okay, let's go back up to the top here, and we'll look at the file. So there's a lot of drop downs in the main menu at the very top here. They're loaded with all kinds of modeling tools, but we're not going to really get too far into those because I prefer to have a project we're working on, kind of give you some context on what these tools do rather than kind of just spewing out like titles. You have your mesh, edit mesh. Those are all very key. You see how the drop down is just full of all kinds of tools. They're all super handy for modeling, but without a project to work on, they'll just have no context. So we'll come back to those as we get into our next project. Just know that as long as you're in your polygons, you'll have all these drop downs just full of tools for you to use for modeling. And we'll get into those in a little bit on the next lesson. Make sure it's in polygons, because if you look at the main menu, I changed it to animation. All those change, and those tools that you had in polygons won't be available to you. So make sure it's under polygons. If we go down to the next level, we have things like snapping and rendering. We'll definitely be getting to snapping on the solar system project, which will be next. And rendering, I mean, if we want to do a render right now, since we have a cube, I can kind of demonstrate that really quick. There's default lights that are set up inside of Maya, but if you want more specific lighting going on, you'll have to kind of design those and turn the default lights off. But just to give you an example real quick, we'll fire off a render of this cube we have. It's over on a different window, but that's a render of the default shader with like there's no ground, so there's no shadows that you can see, and the default lighting is very flat. But that's just an example of like a render. This is not an exported render, mind you. There's a whole other tab for doing export rendering. If you look here a little further down, there's rendering. We'll get into that again in the next lesson with the solar system project. Going down a level, we have this is called the shelf. The shelf has a bunch of tools just like the main menu has, but they're the more common tools you'd use all the time, and they're tabbed out to the particular type of thing you're doing. So like we're doing polygons, like under this tab here, and there's a whole tab for polygons, just like animation and dynamics and rendering. They're just loaded with common things you do all the time with those tools, and they're just there so they're easier for you to get to. For me, I do a lot of my own projects with tools I like to use all the time. So I can create a custom shelf. Let's see if there's anything in this custom here. There's a couple little ones here I did for an example. So there's already a custom tab here. If you want to create your own, though, you just hit the arrow in the far left on the shelf tab and go to new shelf, and it'll load you up a new one. You just name it what you want, and it'll come up as blank. To add the tools you want to that shelf, let's say we're going to go into mesh and I want to add booleans to my shelf. I hold down Control and Shift and left click booleans, and you'll see it'll pop up here, or it won't. Let's try something else. Mesh tools. Let's try bridge tool. There we go. Apparently I can't add a boolean tool to my shelf, but it'll let me add the bridge tool. So I guess there's some instances it won't let you add a tool to your shelf, but for the most part, most of the tools, all you have to do is find the one you like in the drop down and hold down Control Shift and left click, and I'll put it inside the shelf that is currently active. Okay, so let's press space, or let's just go back to the main viewport. The last thing I'm going to show you guys today is the different shaders for the render viewport. So one key thing is make sure your viewport 2.0 is active. Sometimes there's other reasons to have different renders for your viewport active, but for the most part, have viewport 2.0 active if you can. Next, we're going to look at the shaders over here. There's these little boxes. These other ones here are kind of like film gates. I'm not going to get too much into those because they're not really anything we're going to get into. And film gates is a little bit handy. If you hold down left click on film gate, it'll pull up these little gray sides here, kind of show you when you're rendering what will be cut off. So that's kind of handy. But what I want you guys more to know about is this section here with all the little cubes and the checkered ball. If you don't have this blue cube here checked, this cube you have here will be wireframe mode. So see there, it's all we got is a wireframe. So keep that there checked unless you want to work in wireframe mode. Going down the line here, we have this one here with the white lines on it. I like to have this one active. It puts the blue lines on the cube so that along the edges, so you can kind of see the contours. Activate that, you can see the blue lines here. Next is the checkered. That is your checkered or your textures. I'm sorry. We don't have any textures attached to this cube, but if you were to have, let's say you went to an outside program like Photoshop or Mudbox and attach those to one of your shaders, it would display like if you had lettering or any kind of painted texture, or if you had normal maps. Normal maps are a 3D texture that you usually use inside of a game engine. If you hit this checkered box, it'll make it to where these are displayed on here. But like I said, we don't have anything attached to our shader besides just the orange color, so it doesn't show anything. Lighting, this is like for if we have special lights, we'll activate those. Same thing with shadows. It'll turn shadows off and on. It's more of a render, just so you can kind of see what it's a preview for rendering for the windows. The next tool I kind of find handy is this little checkered green box. I use this quite a bit. Sometimes you'll have multiple objects, and if you hold down Control-D, it'll duplicate them. So we'll make a few of those. And then if you turn the window sideways and say, okay, these ones are, let's select this one here in the middle. And say, okay, well, I need to work on the edge, and this one over here is just in the way. I can't, it's hard to get in here and work. You can isolate this one here by clicking this one option here, and it'll make sure this is the only one that you're going to have to see. Then when you're done, changing like, vertexes, scaling those or moving them or whatever you're trying to do here, deleting the face if that's what you're after, you can click this checker box and it'll bring all your objects back. Now, the last three options here, this one's called X-ray. It'll let you see through objects while keeping them slightly shaded. It's kind of like I think it's like a wireframe 2.0 is the way I kind of see it. Allows you to kind of see through objects you're trying to work on. It's kind of handy. And the last one here is for animation, being able to see your bone rigs inside of 3D models. But since we're not in character rigging or animation yet, we'll save that one for later. Okay, so in a nutshell, I think that we kind of did a pretty good job at covering the user interface here for Maya. We're going to pick up in the solar system project next, and if you guys want to follow me over there, we'll dive a little deeper into Maya and kind of use some of the tools and start creating some cool stuff. And thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.